The spring afternoon of April 13th, 1919, was marked by a festive atmosphere in Amritsar as people celebrated Baisakhi, a traditional harvest festival. Yet, under the shadow of colonial repression, that day took a horrific turn that would etch itself into the soul of a nation. As thousands gathered peacefully at Jallianwala Bagh, many to protest the arrest of local leaders Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal, the ground beneath them became a crucible of blood, bullets, and betrayal. The British officer General Reginald Dyer, convinced that he was quelling a rebellion, marched his troops into the enclosed park and ordered them to open fire without warning. The exits were few, the gathering was unarmed, and the soldiers did not stop until their ammunition was nearly exhausted. What followed was one of the darkest days in colonial Indian history. While this event is remembered as a symbol of British tyranny, less is spoken about the individuals whose courage, suffering, and testimony helped shape the narrative of resistance. Among these unsung heroes were not only those who perished, but also those who survived, spoke out, and bore witness to history in a way that would eventually ignite national consciousness. One such figure was Chetar Sankaran Nair, a man of immense moral courage, who, though not present at Jallianwala Bagh, resigned from the Viceroy's Executive Council in protest of the massacre. In a time when many Indian elites chose silence, Nair's act of defiance sent shockwaves through the British administration and inspired a generation of Indians to recognize that justice could not be achieved through cooperation with a tyrannical regime. His resignation letter, rich with indignation and righteousness, declared that no self-respecting Indian could continue to serve under a government capable of such cruelty. His protest was not dramatic or militant, but it was deeply powerful, resonating in political circles across India and Britain. The courage to speak truth to power in official corridors made Nair one of the earliest bureaucratic martyrs of Indian nationalism. At the heart of the massacre's backstory were Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal, both respected leaders in Punjab's political awakening. Advocates for non-violence and unity, they had been active in protesting the repressive Rowlatt Act, which allowed for indefinite detention without trial. Their sudden arrest, carried out with the stealth of colonial paranoia, sparked outrage and drew people to Jallianwala Bagh to demand justice. Ironically, they were detained to prevent unrest, but their detention became the spark that lit the fire of rebellion. Though imprisoned during the massacre, their later release brought these leaders into the spotlight, but the trauma of knowing their arrests had precipitated such tragedy haunted them for years. They continued to speak out, helping to frame the massacre not as an isolated incident, but as a symptom of a larger, rotting colonial structure. Inside the bag that day was a woman named Ratan Devi, whose story rarely finds space in official accounts. Her husband had come with her to hear the speeches, unaware of the horror that would unfold. When the bullets began raining down, he shielded her with his body and took fatal shots to his chest. Amidst the cries and chaos, Ratan Devi refused to leave. All night she sat beside her husband's corpse, holding his lifeless hand, praying silently and weeping until sunrise. Her testimony, later recorded by nationalist investigators, painted a portrait of loss so personal that it transcended statistics. She wasn't an activist, nor a politician, just a wife whose grief gave a human face to the statistics of death. In her pain was the echo of 1,000 unnamed women who lost fathers, sons, husbands, and brothers that day, their sorrow buried beneath the weight of political consequence. Another crucial figure was Lal Girdari Lal, a humble eyewitness whose vantage point from a nearby building made him a chronicler of death. His detailed account described not just the firing, but also the desperation of men, women, and children as they clawed at the walls for escape, many of them crushed or shot as they tried to flee. He saw with horror how soldiers aimed at people trying to climb the wall, how they shot at those attempting to crawl away, and how no order was given to stop even when the screaming had faded. His testimony became one of the foundational narratives of the massacre and was later used by both Indian and British inquiries to reconstruct the scene. It was not easy for Lal to speak, his own trauma etched into every word. But he knew that if people did not hear the truth, justice would remain forever out of reach. Among those who survived the hail of bullets was a schoolteacher named Wazir Ali. He had come to the Bagh with a few students, hoping to listen and reflect. A bullet tore through his side, knocking him unconscious. Hours later, when he awoke under a pile of bodies, he could barely move. But he did not stay down. After a long recovery, he returned to his teaching post, determined to educate a new generation about the dangers of submission and the power of truth. For Wazir Ali, survival came with the responsibility of remembrance. His story, passed down through local oral traditions, became a quiet beacon of resilience, symbolizing how education can resist erasure and how even the injured can become warriors of memory. Pratap Singh, another survivor, was perhaps luckier, though the scars he bore were no less deep. When the bullets began to fly, he dropped to the ground and remained motionless as bodies fell around him. A bullet grazed his shoulder, but he did not flinch. Covered in blood, not all of it his own, he lay there until nightfall, only moving when the moonlight cast long shadows over the Bagh. He managed to crawl through a narrow exit and escaped, carrying the trauma of what he had witnessed with him for the rest of his life. He later gave interviews to local newspapers and community leaders, insisting that people must not forget the horror, for in forgetting, we allow the perpetrators to escape judgment. Then there was Lala Budmal, who had brought his son to the gathering, never imagining it would be their last walk together. When the shooting started, he shielded his son with his arms, but the bullets found their mark. The child died instantly. Lala Budmal, too wounded to speak or move, lay beside his son's body for hours. When he was finally rescued, he refused food or comfort. His grief turned into advocacy. He became a visible figure in the aftermath, attending every inquiry and commission hearing. His pain made him determined not to let his son's death be forgotten. Though history books seldom mention his name, locals in Amritsar recall his quiet vigils outside British offices, a father demanding accountability from an empire. But not all stories are heroic in the traditional sense. Hans Raj, once a nationalist, later became an approver for the British, testifying against fellow Indians. His betrayal is remembered with bitterness, yet his story, too, deserves mention, not to glorify, but to understand the pressures of colonial rule. Fear, blackmail, and the threat of execution loomed large over ordinary citizens. Hans Raj's choices reflect the psychological warfare the British used, splitting communities, creating informants, and punishing resistance with precision. His legacy is complex, but serves as a cautionary tale of how imperialism corrupts not just systems, but souls. Amid these individual stories, we must also recognize the collective spirit of the masses. The massacre did not end with the bloodshed. Local families buried the dead, treated the wounded, and reopened the garden to the public. In defiance of British denial, they preserved the bullet-ridden walls and dried well where many jumped to escape. Community leaders organized prayer meetings and commemorations, refusing to allow the tragedy to fade into silence. Women whose names history did not record nursed the injured, and men carried the maimed to safety. Young boys ran messages between homes and hospitals. The people of Amritsar turned their grief into guardianship, ensuring that the garden would one day become a memorial, not just a graveyard. Outside Punjab, individuals like Pandit K. Santanam worked tirelessly to document the incident. As the secretary to the Indian National Congress's fact-finding commission, he helped compile testimonies and records that countered British whitewashing. His work ensured that the narrative of Jallianwala Bagh was not lost to colonial censorship. The Commission's report, despite being suppressed by the Raj, circulated secretly across India, igniting fury and organizing resistance. Without Santanam's meticulous efforts, much of what we know about the massacre would be lost to time and propaganda. Today, when we speak of Jallianwala Bagh, we often remember the bullets, the brutality, and the blood-soaked ground. But behind every number is a name, behind every death a story, and behind every survivor a legacy of courage. These unsung heroes, men, women, students, teachers, fathers, and lovers, did not plan to become martyrs or witnesses. Yet history cast them into the fire, and they emerged not with vengeance, but with purpose. Their lives became testimonies, their grief became resistance, and their silence became the echo that rattled the foundations of an empire. As we walk through the preserved garden today, with its memorial plaque and eternal flame, let us remember not just the atrocity, but the individuals who gave it voice and meaning. Let us remember the quiet courage, the whispered prayers, the trembling testimonies, and the stubborn hope that refused to die in the face of imperial guns. For in remembering the unsung, we honor the soul of a nation that rose from its wounds and marched, wounded but unbowed, toward freedom.